Welcome to the Katrina Forward Symposium. This is the kickoff event of a season of programming that we planned at the Blanco Center called the Katrina Forward Series. And as we move into the fall, we'll have some webinars where we dive a little deeper into the research and the science behind some of the things we'll hear about today and other themes that we maybe don't have time to get to today. One of our very own at the Blanco Center, Liz Skilton, will be hosting a class this fall on campus here, aligned with this series, and we'll have a lecture on October 9th with Andy Horowitz here in Lafayette, among other activities. More information about some of those other events will be shared later today. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors, in particular Paul Rainwater, the Haney Family Foundation, the Gilbo Charitable Trust, Lemoyne, and Parrish is advocating for coastal endurance, and many of you may know as PACE, as well as all of our other sponsors. And without your support, we really couldn't make an event like this happen. And I'd also like to offer a special acknowledgement to the sponsors that helped to support getting some of the students in the room. As you look across this room throughout the day, I'm sure you'll all see some familiar faces. I'm really excited about the group of policy leaders and highly engaged policy thinkers that we have coming today. But you'll also see some fresh young faces that you may not recognize. And so it's important to us that we engage the next generation of policymakers and thought leaders. So we've been able to invite some students in as guests of some of our sponsors today as well. So thank you for that. We've designed today's program to offer a unique day of reflection on Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, how they impacted Louisiana, and how they changed the way we work together as a state. Today's conversations will reflect on how the 2005 hurricanes changed the way we approach some of the state's longest standing challenges. And throughout the day, you'll have an opportunity to hear from some incredible panels with speakers who were in critical roles when the storms first hit and helped guide us through response and recovery. We're also fortunate to have some really great leaders who serve in similar leadership roles today. And some of our panelists will serve both of those functions of having been involved in 2005 and continuing to be leaders pushing Louisiana forward today. So throughout our planning meetings, we encouraged our speakers to think about not only the past and lessons learned, but to think about the future for Louisiana. And we invite all of you to engage in that today as we think about reflections on the last 20 years and identifying priorities for the next 20 years. Before we start our panels, I'd like to take a minute and invite Paul Rainwater to the stage. In addition to serving as a panelist on one of our panels later today, Paul saw the potential in this symposium and stepped up as a lead sponsor, so we're thankful for that support. In addition to a lauded military career, Paul was on the front lines of these storms, working as the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Lake Charles in 2005. He was directly involved in response and recovery and held key positions under Governor Blanco, then working for U.S. Senator Mary Landrieu, then multiple senior roles under Governor Jindal, just to name a few of the ways that he has helped push Louisiana forward over the last 20 years. So I'd like to give a few minutes for Paul to share some thoughts as we begin our program.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for putting this together. I look around and I see really smart people. And the reason that I thought it was extremely important to be a sponsor, to be involved with this forum, one is to remember Governor Blanco's legacy. I had the opportunity to staff her at local meetings, working with the Recovery Authority, and I also had the opportunity to staff her in Washington, D.C. when I was Mary Landrieu's legislative director. I will tell you that I have never seen a leader step up and step in like she did. And of course I'm 63 now. I was a young 42 back then, right? But we were dealing with, as we all know the numbers, right? 1,392 deaths, maybe 1,800, we're not sure. Almost $200 billion of economic damage, 250,000 homes damaged, 82,000 businesses destroyed. You can go down the numbers and they are still the largest disaster in American history. And for a governor to step into an administration and look, I'm a Republican, this is nonpartisan, but the reality of it is people in D.C. were doubting what was happening. And she did an amazing job stepping into those meetings and championing our state. I see Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid, who was Deputy Chief of Staff at the time, who I talked to quite a bit. during those moments. But I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to be a sponsor and to remember her as a great leader. Just real quick, I mean, this is about sharing ideas and preparing for the future, right? We will never forget Katrina. Katrina will always be in the history books. And we can never forget the people that lost their lives because of 53 levee breaches. Not of anything they did. They were just at home. There was a federal levee system that failed. The Corps of Engineers have learned those lessons of the $14 billion. You're going to hear from coastal experts later on about the amount of money that's been spent. We cannot stop that mantra. The coast is too important. And as Senator Mary Landry reminded me 300 times for 365 days, it's a working coast, right? And people provide energy and continue to provide energy for the United States of America and for the world. And we cannot forget that. So with that, I want to say thank you for being here and sharing your ideas, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, for those thoughts and reflections. I'd like to also invite up Mayor Monique Boulay, Mayor President of Lafayette, to offer everybody a welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank everybody for being here. But I have a bigger thank you for you because many of you were a part of Katrina. And people ask me, what do you carry with you in a public office that you got from your mom? And I'm going to tell you it's the lessons that I saw being exhibited through the most difficult times. I think that's when you learn the most, right? When you're tested, when you're driven to the end. But I saw my mother, supported by so many of you in this audience, learn how to walk through really difficult situations or conversations, not knowing how it would end, and pushing forward to do the right thing no matter what. And in public office, it is so much easier not to do that, but to manipulate and to conjure up certain things. But to really address issues fearlessly was something that I watched her do, and it's something that I hope I can emulate in my own career. But it's something that she did not do alone, as Paul talked about, as Kim, and so many people. Whether you were in the government or on the ground, everybody was impacted so much. And what this state did was really pull itself together. You didn't hear that in the national storyline, but you saw it behind the scenes. And we really did rescue ourselves, regardless of what the rhetoric was. And so for me, I learned lessons that I don't even know that I know are embedded in what I do and how I do it. So I am grateful. I was grateful I was the one with all the babies in those years. And helping just on the very outskirts where I could and trying to support her, but really watching so many great leaders in this state in the most difficult times, in the most stressful, in the most tested situations, really fight to do what's right. And if we can all take that lesson in our own worlds, and particularly in elected office, that is the greatest gift that can come out of that time, other than, of course, the rebuilding of the state. But it is a phenomenal lesson that I do take with me every day, and hope that I can live up to that. And so thank you, Stephen, for all of your work, for all of the work of the Policy Center. It is a great tribute to who we are as a people, really trying to address issues from a data-driven, from a realistic perspective and not a political perspective. That is something novel in today's world, but a great deal of work goes into it here at the Policy Center, which is the legacy, I think, that was intended. My sister Pilar is here. Pilar was instrumental in setting the Policy Center up with Mama, with her intentions in her last years. And so I also want to thank and acknowledge Pilar. So thank you, Stephen, and welcome everybody.
Thank you for that welcome, and I'd like to invite up to the stage our first panel. We'll get to hear, our panel will be moderated by Barry Erwin, and I'm going to give him the honor of introducing our distinguished panel. But we'll be diving into the topic of education, and look forward to hearing the conversation.
There we go. Well, thanks very much, Stephen, and for everybody for coming and for having us here. I think we have a really great panel to talk about, you know, one of the big things that came out of Katrina and Rita, but education, which was, as you know, hugely impacted. We're going to talk a little bit about that impact in the past and also look forward to the future of kind of what's happened and where we go from here and the lessons learned. But we have a fantastic panel, and I'm going to start way off to the edge with just a quick introduction. You know these folks probably already. They'll have some more bios will be available later on, but just a really quick introduction. Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid, who of course is the current Commissioner of Higher Education, but during that time she was the Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Blanco, so she was involved very much heavily in a lot of aspects besides just the education piece, but now she's of course leading higher education. Next to her, Dr. Joseph Savoie, who everybody around here knows, President until he just announced the other day of his resignation or his retirement. He's going to be President Emeritus, but during the time he was the Commissioner of Higher Education during that very difficult time for all of higher ed. So thanks for being here. Paul Pastorek next. He was a former member of BESI back during the time of Katrina originally, but then went to work with Governor Blanco as Superintendent of Education, and really for the K-12 aspect of it, really oversaw a lot of that recovery, or basically all of that recovery for K-12 education at that time. And with me now too, Dr. Sharon Clark, who is a current member of BESI, also the school leader at Sophie B. Wright, gotta always remember that, charter school, public school in New Orleans, where she was a leader at that school at the time of Katrina, and it's really, of course, part of the rebirth of that entire school today to make it one of the top schools in the city and in the state. So thanks to all of our panel, and I wanted to start real quickly with kind of just a quick reflection. You know, looking back when Katrina was bearing in from the Gulf of Mexico, it looked like really a worst case scenario type of hurricane. And then at the very end, it kind of took a turn to the east. It felt like maybe we had dodged a bullet to some degree from the wrath of that hurricane as a storm. But then really the unthinkable happened, and those levees broke, and that just created an entire new scenario and a new chapter really, you know, in our state's history in so many ways. So my first thought or question to ask is, looking back at that time, what was going through your head, you know, personally, but also, you know, from an education point of view, recovery point of view, when you had that moment and realized, okay, maybe we dodged a bullet, but all of a sudden something happened that we could never have really foreseen. And Dr. Clark, I'll start with you. Sorry about that.
I was hoping we started over there. At the time, yes, I was. I actually stayed during the hurricane. I don't leave during hurricanes. I probably will after that, but I stayed during the hurricane. And I just remember when Susan Rogen said, the water is rising, but we don't know where it's coming from, because they did not know at that time that the levees had broken. And I remember going toward Jackson and then coming back, trying to cross the twin spans, which had collapsed, and having to go all around to get to Austin, Texas, where my sister was. And I think that the feeling I felt immediately was, will I ever come home again? Will we ever see our school system and our students again? And that the challenge became balancing the professional part, because my school had only been open 30 days prior to the storm hitting. So it's balancing the professional part while also balancing the personal piece. And so the responsibility became making sure my students, our schools had networks to talk to students, because there was no system at that time to make sure that we were connecting across the city. And we knew our students were displaced, we knew our families were displaced, and it wasn't just displaced across the state of Louisiana. They were displaced in cities and states and basically all over the country. And so there was this feeling of just devastation of making sure as an educator, returning to where we were a norm for our students, but also personally, because my father died during that time, sort of like balancing all those aspects of what had happened with Katrina in a system that was already not in a good place in the city of New Orleans. So it was devastating making sure that there was a balance to both.
Paul?
Well, the schools. The schools after the storm were so devastated. There were 126 schools in the city, and of them, 107 were completely destroyed. Others were damaged. And in fact, after Katrina, there was no buildings really that kids could go to. There was no buildings that teachers could go to. And the state had to end up not giving a distribution of money because that's based on students' attendance, and the district had to fire all the teachers. It created this really terrible situation where people had left the city, kids had left the city, there wasn't really a place for them to come back. And how were you going to get this whole system restarted? Cecil Picard was actually the superintendent during the storm, my predecessor. And, you know, I was in Baton Rouge watching it from a distance and just could not believe the destruction. You know, I had been working in the New Orleans schools for a long time, and I knew that, frankly, before the storm, the district, Cecil had put it under a financial plan because they couldn't get their finances straight. They were bankrupt. They had 21 FBI investigations going on in the central office. The FBI had offices there to conduct investigations, and the facilities were in terrible shape, $1 billion worth of unmet needs. So now the system was ravaged by this storm. It was going to present a Herculean task.
Dr. Savoie, what was your immediate thought when you realized what was happening in New Orleans and that area?
I don't think I can say it in public. I was at the Emergency Operations Center, and we thought we had dodged the bullet. Now, we had prepared because we knew it was going to be a major storm, but we were high-fiving, some would celebrate. And then a few hours later, the flooding started, and then all hell broke loose after that. So the impact in New Orleans, we had 15 colleges and universities which were shut down. We had 2 more, Southeastern and Nichols, which had severe weather damage, typical hurricane damage. About 75,000 students were immediately displaced. About 20,000 faculty and staff were displaced. So we called a meeting at the Regent's office the next day with system presidents and anyone else who could get there, and we started organizing and making some decisions about all sorts of things. We set some priorities up. People was first, how we're going to deal with people. Property. Then we talked about processes and how we're going to make things easier for people to re-engage. And then the 4th P was try to stay out of politics as best we could. And thankfully we were able to generally do that part. Well, we started making a lot of decisions real quickly about transferring students, about students who had been displaced could enroll at any other institution without paying tuition. They could move into dormitories, we would feed them. Interestingly, their families came with them, so we had families in dormitories and dogs and cats and animals and everything else. The schools all responded in a fabulous way. We had 2 medical triage centers, one at LSU and one at Nichols. Nichols didn't have power. They had to bring in power for the medical center. Almost every other campus in the state set up staging areas of various sorts for emergency responders. and shelters of various sorts for people who had been displaced. So it was chaotic, but we tried to keep it coordinated chaos, if you will, and tried to set a single agenda for the state. And then Rita happened, you know, and we had to start over, but we had learned a lot of lessons from Katrina. So it was full steam for quite a while.
Dr. Reed?
So I'll echo a lot of what has been said about sort of the joy of dodging the bullet, right? We were watching the media in the French Quarter, no water in the French Quarter. And then as Tijo said, you know, the word that the levees broken and the water was flowing. My first thought was fear. We knew over 100,000 families in New Orleans did not have a vehicle and would be trapped. We knew that the storm, the magnitude of it would be enormous, much more than any city or state individually could handle. And so just immediately sort of thinking about what are we going to do and how are we going to save our people, because it was just enormous. And as Paul mentioned, like America's largest disaster ever. And so how do you meet the moment in a disaster that's apocalyptic? And what do you do for your people? How do you support the leaders that are going to have to go 24/7 for forever? It seemed like helicopters. It was like you were in a MASH unit, right? Helicopters every day. You're just listening to all of that, and the misery factor of people who were just in poverty, in need, in pain, in trauma, and how are we going to support and help them? That's what I remember.
Well, just to follow up, you were in the governor's office at that time, not just in higher ed as you are now. There were so many challenges, but in terms of the biggest challenge that you really faced, what you really had to deal with, I mean, I think of things like, you know, communication, lack thereof, people all over the place, displaced all over different parts of the state. What were the biggest challenges in the moment that come to mind that you really had to deal with?
So the first challenge obviously was getting people out of harm's way. And it took forever to get buses, to get food, to get water, just basic services for people. And we learned a lesson. The cavalry's not coming. You have to save yourself. And so this was the beginning of the Cajun Navy and all the things of people just banding together and figuring out how to help themselves. So the immediate concern was really trying to make sure that we minimize the loss of life by trying to get people out of harm's way. It was a huge undertaking trying to coordinate with every state across the country who were taking our citizens and trying to house them and support them. And then trying, of course, to navigate with the federal government and individuals who were saying we shouldn't build it back. New Orleans doesn't deserve the money, and knowing that there was nothing in the state coffers that would be able to meet the moment in terms of the magnitude of the dollars that were going to be needed.
Dr. Savoie, to follow up on that, it strikes me when you think about higher education and dealing with disaster things, you're used to a certain amount of you know, displacement and things that are kind of, I guess, I won't say routine, but more of the norm. In this case, for higher ed, it was just a total catastrophic situation where you had so many people displaced, and you were dealing not just with their academic needs and the things that you're kind of used to dealing with, those types of things, enrollment and all that, dealing with academics. You were dealing with life, housing, food, necessities of life. How do you transform, you know, higher ed, these institutions of higher learning, into really, you know, rescue operation, which is basically what you did for so many thousands of students?
Well, I think pulling everyone together and agreeing that we were going to come to an agreement on how we were going to handle things, and we were going to be consistent statewide so that people were treated the same and people were treated fairly. And to everyone's credit, it was so shocking that everyone was willing to tear the barriers down and go along with the group. So we kind of centralized decision-making, and we just decided to focus on, as Kim said, people first. And so what are their needs? Well, they particularly the kids from New Orleans, not only did they lose their school, they lost their homes and their parents, and they probably lost their jobs as well. So they had nothing. In getting them into an environment where there was some steadiness, some hope, we thought was very important. So every campus across the state filled their dormitories up, filled their arenas up, and everyone just pulled together. It was a magnificent display of humanity and of everyone coming together. And we started making some decisions. Probably half of them were illegal, but we did it anyhow. We guaranteed that any student could transfer to any other school without having to present any documentation, transcripts, because transcripts were underwater. Did those kinds of things. We guaranteed faculty that they would have their positions covered and staff, that we would continue to pay them, even though we had to cut $75 million. They lost $250 million in revenue from tuition and fees and bond payments and all those other things, knowing that eventually we'd figure it out, but we had to deal with the emergency at that point, not the long-term result of it. We just keep working that way. So I thought it was a magnificent display of humanity by the higher education community and in all the communities in which the colleges existed, because they all rallied around everyone as well.
Paul, how about from the K-12 perspective, the broad perspective, biggest challenge in those moments that you had to deal with?
The biggest challenge that we had to deal with immediately was there were kids that were going to be coming back. There were adults and families that were going to be coming back. They wanted to come back. And the question was, how could we arrange for facilities that, and teachers and principals and administrators to reopen schools? And, not unlike the description you have here, we actually created a center where parents could come with their students, and it would be a one-stop shop where they could figure out which schools were open in the city, what neighborhoods were those schools in, and how could we facilitate them quickly into the schools that were available. But, when I took over, Governor Blanco asked me to serve, and I was delighted to serve when poor Cecil passed away in early 2007. The mission was we had 10,000 seats we had to make available because that was the expected influx of students. We had 800 teacher positions we had to fill. And I took over the job in March of 2007, and that was what we expected to show up in September of 2007. I mean, it was really an overwhelming task, and yet the collaboration across many different disciplines. Joe, how did you deal with that in higher ed now that I'm coming on the scene? And Joe and I were connected at the hip with the experiences he had and what we were doing. And, and I'll never forget, I asked the governor, I said, Governor, if you want me to do this, I really need you to have the state facilities office to handle the facilities so I can handle the education stuff. She said, no can do, you got facilities too. Okay, all right. Anybody in the education department know anything about facilities? Nope. But we got some National Guardsmen and we started working on it. And that was the beauty of this. And I think LRA, I want to mention LRA too. Somebody will mention it, I'm sure. But LRA, Louisiana Recovery Authority, this blue ribbon panel that was put together, became that coordinating center in a more official way after the immediate. And LRA was a big factor in helping us get going.
Dr. Clark, just to finish up on that thought, you were on the ground floor at the school level. What was that like, having to deal with that at ground zero?
It was very difficult. I just remember being in Austin, Texas, and I knew that all the schools were shut down. I also know the teachers were fired. And this was the middle class part of New Orleans. So it was sort of scary knowing that there wasn't anybody there. We didn't know when we would return home. I just remember looking at TV and they were talking about the National Guard. And they showed the headquarters of the National Guard because it was a facility that didn't get a lot of water, just some busted pipes. And I'm sitting in Austin and I'm like, that looks like Sophie B. Wright. That looks like the school that I'm at. And so once I found that out, I maneuvered my way, probably not legal, to get back into the city because I knew that in order for people to return, there had to be a school open for the first responders and National Guard children. So Wright became the first school that opened in 2006 because the facility wasn't in great condition, but we didn't have that much water. And the good thing is Wright was one of the first 5 schools to become chartered. So I think there's always a plan for everything, and because they were not thinking about opening Orleans Parish School, I was able to receive funding directly from Recovery School District and the state. And so that gave us funding. And from there, I was able to call teachers back. We actually stayed in the building that was supposed to have ghosts at the time from the National Guard. But it was a place, a facility to stay. And children just started coming because the police came back. They were living on a cruise boat. And so as we began to look at opening schools, providing meals and somewhere for kids to go, we saw a trickle of people coming back in the city. But it was really devastating. There were no hospitals, there wasn't grocery stores, you couldn't get gas. And so it was devastating. And unless you were there to an extent, you can't imagine the feeling of just fear and also wondering, is this going to last? Can we sustain this? But there was also this feeling of hope, and I'm thinking about what Paul said with the system. The system was so bankrupt financially and academically already. It wasn't just about the levees breaking down the land. It was about the levees weakening a system that was already broken. And so for me, I just remember thinking, it's got to get better. It's got to get better. And if these buildings are in bad, and they were in horrible, horrible condition in the city of New Orleans. And in my mind, I'm thinking, they gotta come rebuild, right? It's just gotta get better. So that was my hope. Like, we have to do something different. And thank goodness for you and Governor Blanco and the people who did change things.
Just keeping the focus on K-12 education, I think you can look at Katrina, and it often is, I think, as a case study on what can happen after a disaster in terms of transformative change. And I think there's no question that we saw that in Louisiana, both in K-12 and in higher education in many ways. At the school level first, which is where you were, what do you think in terms of lessons learned came out of Katrina that really made transformative change or really changed the way education is done in New Orleans?
I think it was important that a crisis can always be a catalyst for change. But if it's going to be a catalyst for change, you have to be bold, innovative, and make sure that you can sustain that particular system. I thought to myself, and I think about it now, like it's important to look at the lessons of the past, but not to return to the lessons of the past. And so I'm glad that a new system has been built, and we continue to move forward and making sure that we are looking at a system where the inequities are less. We're serving all kids, making sure that we are accountable, fiscally, I know we just had another issue in New Orleans, but fiscally able to take care of our students at all times. And I just think that the institutional knowledge that is still there in New Orleans has to be built on. That capacity has to continue to grow, because it's not about the fact that we're changed, why we changed, but why did we change? We had to change. And so I am excited that as we continue to move forward in New Orleans with the chartering system and the fact that I have been there 24 years now, and knock on whatever this is, it is the 4th year in a row, I think that, no, this is the 2nd year in a row that we have not had a failing school in the city of New Orleans. And that is huge, that's great. And so I just think too, as we go, the narrative that is still being painted because of the pain that still exists in New Orleans, it's not the true narrative of what's happening in our schools. So we have to do a better job of the advocacy of painting that narrative. I'm sorry for taking up so much.
No.
I'm passionate about this though.
No.
You know, I have to. Can you hear me now? Yeah, I have to remind people something, you know, in the midst of the chaos, which was August 29th, right, 2005. In November 2005, the governor put bills to the legislature in emergency session to take over the schools in the city of New Orleans. The governor made a very bold decision, not only to take over schools, but to make every school a charter school. Now, this governor, a former teacher, would certainly make the union, which had a collective bargaining agreement in New Orleans, unhappy by this decision. Unions hate charter schools, period, and stop. But the governor knew that a radical transformation needed to take place. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the boldest experiments in the United States. There is no other school district. By the way, every school is a charter school district today. That's what the governor wanted, and that's what happened. No other city in the state has this. There are many people who are pushing to get more charter schools to 50% in their city. They'd like to get them all. Why? Because the recovery in New Orleans has not only been exceptional. Please review the Progressive Policy Institute papers that have been written extensively about the success in New Orleans, a Democratic organization, Progressive Policy Institute. The success in New Orleans has been exceptional for an inner city school that serves challenged kids. And most importantly, it has been sustained for now 20 years. Most reforms get thrown out the next superintendent that comes in. That's the way it happens in the United States. I work all over the United States with public schools. That's what happens. What has happened, the way it is structured now, the charter schools make it very difficult for the baby to be thrown out with the bathwater. That is the brilliance of what the governor wanted to accomplish, and she did. We really should reflect on this phenomenal, bold change that's taken place. And Sharon gets to live it every day. I've long gone. I've had 2 superintendents follow me, and superintendents in the Recovery School District. 5 have followed. And it's still a district with no F schools in it. It's remarkable. This has not happened in any other city in the country, believe me. So we have much to be proud of for that bold change in November of 2005.
Dr. Savoie, turning to the higher ed piece a little bit. Lessons learned, of course, always lessons learned out of disasters. What types of things come to mind to you of lessons that we learned out of Katrina that we still see in place today, or that we see the roots of in higher education today? Kind of some of the aftermath or some of the results that are part of higher ed today, lessons that we learned out of that have kind of become embedded in higher ed today.
Well, there are several things that are still they're common practice now that were new then. One is records, and how do we have redundancy of our important student records. People would have them in warehouses on campus, so they'd have, UNO had theirs on Carondelet Street and got flooded out there, even though UNO didn't flood, but they lost their records because they were in another building. Now all the schools have arrangements with other institutions in different parts of the state for backup of their data. Electronic records now. Now you got the cloud, but so the records, the way we maintain that. The way students transfer among institutions, it's a heck of a lot easier now than it was before. Distance learning. There was a little of that going on, Not much. The Southern Regional Education Board, through the Sloan Foundation, gave $1 million towards the development of online courses. So we had a library of online courses that students who couldn't get physically to a campus could take classes. Now every institution in the state has significant online learning. I think how to respond has improved significantly. We're much better prepared as storms are coming in or other types of disasters. COVID, for example, we wouldn't have had all the electronic communication, the telecommunications abilities, we wouldn't have survived COVID. But we had a lot of experience with it because of Katrina and Rita, and people had built the infrastructure up, and it was just another step, just another way of doing things. I'm sure I can think of a few others, but those are some that come immediately to mind.
Well, Dr. Reed, you're Commissioner of Higher Education right now. Do you see a through line in your work today of some of those lessons learned from Katrina that are part of higher ed, the way that you just operate normally today?
So I would say first and foremost, the idea that education is a passport to prosperity, I think is an incredibly important through line. Kathleen would say, Governor Blanco would say, education is poverty's mortal enemy. And so this idea that we have to make sure more people have access to the education and training to support themselves and their families is critical. So for Kathleen, as Paul mentioned, as an educator, she knew that she had to support education. I can remember standing in her office watching Katrina kids going to school for the first day in Texas. And she said, people will know what to expect. They will see a better school system, children and parents, and they will come back expecting more. And we have to deliver more. So I think that is important. This idea of excellence, of meeting students and families where they are, is important. I think about, T.J. and I talked about this because I was a young employee under Dr. Savoie. We talked about need-based aid. We created the state's need-based aid GO grant in 2007 through an MOU, codified in law in 2010. So this idea that we would have more access, affordability. Kathleen brought us to the SRB average, teacher pay, faculty pay, higher education, all of those investments, because she knew that it was foundational to the recovery of our state. And so now, as we think about what does it mean to be educated and what does it mean to be prosperous for our state and our people, the through line is this continued message of education training. And how do we make sure these anchor points in our community are places of prosperity? Of course, the next evolution of the work is the evolution of education to workforce, because the community college system was a young system, I think created in 1999. But it pivoted from more of a conversation around associate degrees to certificates in workforce training, standing up housing recovery and things of that sort, so people could be trained in HVAC and plumbing and carpentry and all of those things. So those things are a legacy, of a foundational legacy on which we're continuing to build.
Yeah, and Dr. Savoie, I think when we were talking a while back, you said something about Katrina and Rita actually hastened or sped up to some degree the development of our community college system, because it was just really on the ground floor when Katrina hit. How did that happen?
Well, the system was created, it was a few community colleges and dozens of technical schools that were semi-autonomous throughout the state. And the notion was that it would evolve into a system of sorts where the technical colleges would affiliate with the community colleges. Well, after Katrina, I think there were 7 or 8 technical college campuses, and Delgado, well, we merged all of that into one campus. So you had Delgado as the comprehensive community college and branch campuses at the former technical school sites. That happened statewide over time. So now you have regional community colleges with branches. So you probably, whatever that number is, 12 or 15 institutions as opposed to 75 institutions. And I think it's made it, I think it's standardized the quality of instruction, and we certainly see much greater production. So it had a dramatic effect, I think, on the evolution. Something that probably would have taken 25 years happened in 2 or 3 years.
Paul, the name of this conference is Katrina Forward, and we do want to think about forward-looking things. Question I have is, from the lessons learned over the last 2 decades, are there some things that you can think of that came out of that can still guide, the decisions we make in education going forward? I'm thinking about bold change, about doing things outside of the box, about innovation. What comes to your mind about lessons that we can apply from those past experiences in making our decisions going forward for education, K-12 and higher ed, really?
Well, I think probably the biggest challenge that I see is that we continue to have low expectations for children who come from challenged circumstances. People don't like me to say that too much, but I have seen it time and time again, these low expectations. Why? Well, because those are the results we usually get with kids from challenged circumstances. But I do think one big lesson learned, and I think this is what Governor Blanco had in mind, is we can succeed with children who come from challenged circumstances. We can succeed with kids whose home life is crippled. And not only did we learn that lesson in New Orleans as we used instructional strategies and charter schools as a model for doing that, but then we expanded those lessons into other parts of the state, because I was able, as state superintendent, to do that. And, it also was a recognition that we had to extend kids to graduate from high school. And lo and behold, in New Orleans, more kids graduated from high school. Lo and behold, more kids went to community college, more kids went to four-year college, and more kids were successful. So, ladies and gentlemen, the lesson learned here is that a system can produce results if it's the right system. People can be successful if the system allows them to be. And what was created in New Orleans was a very different system. I go around the country. I work right now a lot in Texas. Texas has adopted those same strategies, and they're being used all over the state of Texas. Other states have done so too. It's a model, and we should try to replicate that. And I would argue that every district in this state ought to go pay a visit to New Orleans. If they are educators, they should be wished to be educated. There are many lessons to be learned. And when you go on the ground and you see how schooling takes place, it's a lot different than in a traditional school. So that could be a way for schools to be better. And I firmly believe it to be true.
Dr. Clark, again, you're at the school level, and I'm wondering, how did your experiences that you went through rebuilding, turning your school into a really high-performing school, how do those lessons, taking it forward, again, how do you apply those things today and actually, for the future? Are there lessons learned, not just the lessons themselves, but processes or things you think about differently now going forward with your school?
I think as we look forward and move forward, we must continue to build innovative systems that are accountable and not be afraid to give autonomy with accountability to educate kids and serve kids all over the state of Louisiana. Traditional school systems, which is where I came from, it's close. You hold it close because you're responsible. But given autonomy to allow schools to do what is right for that particular group of kids or that community they serve is important. I know for a fact that the autonomy that was given in New Orleans to the charters who were already in existence, they allowed us to quickly come back. We didn't have to worry about that systemic issue of the bureaucracy of all these people talking and nothing getting done. And so I think that we just have to change our mindset and become more free in what we're thinking when we serve kids all across the state, in all the states. And autonomy is very important in schools.
Dr. Reed, again, same kind of question. What do you think about lessons learned and what it means going forward for higher ed? Or how does that whole experience kind of change or frame the way that we make decisions here in Louisiana going forward in terms of higher education, do you think?
So first I would say, not just for higher ed, but just in general, I want to shout out the panelists here, and I see Wald and Paul and Zizarang, Profiles in Courage, Governor Blanco. These are individuals that face Category 5 wins of disagreement about how to rebuild, right? The politics were significant. There were many, many, many people, say it, Paul, who said, we're not going to rebuild, right? We're not going to send money. We're not going to help. New Orleans should not come back. So when you think first about the politics of today, and how do we find purple politics, where people come together and say, let's do the right thing. It's going to be really hard. The politics are going to be really hard, but we're going to make the right thing happen. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to make the right decision. So I think we start with that in terms of thinking about lessons learned. Then I think this conversation around how is education to serve as an equalizer? Is it going to exacerbate the gaps of the have and have-nots, or is it going to erase gaps and allow more people to have access to what they need to support themselves and their families? Lots of questions about return on investment, lots of conversations every decade about is education worth it? But when you look at the data, the benefit goes to the individual with a credential. The people who have access to discretionary income and jobs, those are the people that got out of harm's way. Those are the people in a pandemic that homeschooled their kids and had the resources they need. We have to make sure in a poor state with so much potential that more people have access to education and training than ever before. That is the way we continue to move forward in Louisiana.
Dr. Savoie, last word for you.
Everything she just said. And building a little bit, one of the things that was really helpful in the immediate aftermath was that everyone came together. Kim mentioned we realized the cavalry wasn't coming, we had to help ourselves. And so across institutions, across state agencies, across local and state government, people were working together to do the right thing. And it wasn't mired in what's best for me or politics. Because it was kind of a survival mode. And I think that feeling of cooperation lasted for a long time. And it would be nice to get it back.
Well, I want to thank our panelists for having this great discussion about education in our state.